Hi, everyone, and happy Wellness Day to my UMich students. Today, my goal is to talk about accessibility in a way that is tangible. Most, if not all of us here are designers, so I really want to provide actionable information that everyone can sort of take to their workplace. Hi, my name's Virginia. I'm a UX student at the University of Michigan. I'm going to jump right into it. Just start by explaining why comprehensive accessibility initiatives are needed. So along with this quote, which I like, I'm going to say something that kind of goes along with this idea, which is that accessible initiatives cater to 100% of the population, 100% of your users, my users, sort of regardless of field. And I'll tell you what I mean in a minute. In an equitable world, we would adopt accessible initiatives because it's the right thing to do. But some would argue that it's inconsequential, maybe too expensive for such a small population. But in actuality, a vast majority of the population will benefit from accessibility initiatives at some point in their lives. For example, color contrast helps those who are low vision just as much as those who forgot their glasses or are in direct sunlight. So this is something we can all benefit from. And accessible thinking extends to each phase of the digital product development from research to deployment. So I'm just going to quickly talk about ways in which people can contribute towards accessibility-minded product development. So designers play a key role, of course, when it comes to accessibility. However, I think some chafe against accessible design. They feel like it might hold them back or confine their design decisions, but accessibility should be treated less like a constraint and more like a core part of the design's functionality. You wouldn't remove a button from a page because it doesn't look good. You would design a page to accommodate the button or something along those lines, but the button itself isn't a constraint. It's a necessary function for users. So we should be thinking about accessible design in the same way. And in the UX sphere, we don't often talk about research as something that can be inaccessible. But my point here comes down to representation. Many products that perform well in usability tests are not accessible to people with disabilities because they're just not included in that initial testing. So consider including disabled users in your testing so that potential critical issues don't fall through those cracks. And for writing, this also gets overlooked. There's some useful information online about how to write effective alternative text, which can differ from typical copy, but these tips can be utilized in like text, web page, email. Text should be clear and understandable. It should avoid unnecessary acronyms, jargon. This also enhances usability for abled users who may struggle with understanding complex text. And accessible code is the most straightforward just because there are tangible web standards like WCAG that developers can follow. But in fact, although you could automate a lot of this testing, not all of it can be automated. There does need to be a human element. So do consider creating unit tests for accessibility and do your research on coding nuances like ARIA labels. But ideally, you'd want a human testing process with checks and balances so nothing falls through the cracks. Lastly, for those who don't design or do dev work, there are things that you can do to ensure internal cohesion. This is definitely more relevant in the wake of COVID, every workplace going online and many kind of looking to stay that way long term. But any visual display you submit, like a PDF or PowerPoint, especially if it's going to be distributed, should be reviewed for accessibility. This can be done by anyone. It's a great stepping stone for larger company-wide initiatives. So you might be saying like, cool, okay, what's next? We have all these individual tips, but it may feel like nothing's really changing around you. And it can feel like an uphill battle when your workplace and your management doesn't prioritize these efforts. So in that case, I recommend to speak up, research, listen, volunteer, and most importantly, organize. If you're not seeing change within your leadership, look to the person next to you, leverage your collective power to bring that forward and create change. And when advocating for digital accessibility, as with any social movement, it can feel overwhelming knowing that there will always be work to be done. But we have an obligation to our users to always be working towards a more accessible digital landscape. Thank you all so much for listening. My socials are right there. Feel free to reach out and have a great night.